I was halfway through installing solar panels on my roof when Patricia Vandermeer appeared at the bottom of my ladder, clipboard in hand, looking like she'd just discovered someone had parked slightly crooked in the neighborhood. "Excuse me," she called up, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You need to come down right now. We need to talk about this illegal installation." I wiped the sweat from my forehead and looked down at her. Patricia was the president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA in Gilbert, Arizona, and she'd made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in our community's covenant with the enthusiasm of a military drill sergeant. She was maybe 55, with that specific haircut that seemed standard issue for HOA board members, and she always wore pantsuits even in Arizona's brutal summer heat. "What's illegal about it?" I asked, carefully climbing down the ladder. I'd pulled all the permits, done everything by the book. My company, Horizon Solar Solutions, had installed hundreds of residential systems across the Phoenix metro area without a hitch. "You didn't submit an architectural review request," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. Section 12. Paragraph 4 of the HOA covenant clearly states that any exterior modifications require board approval before installation. I could fine you $500 per day for this violation. I took a deep breath. I'd moved into Meadowbrook Hills 6 months ago, specifically choosing this house because it had perfect southern exposure for solar panels. I'd read through the entire HOA covenant before making an offer, and I knew exactly what it said about solar installations. Arizona Revised Statute 33-1816 prohibits HOAs from banning solar panel installations, I said calmly. The state law supersedes HOA rules. I still pulled county permits and followed all building codes. Patricia's face flushed red. "I don't care what some state law says. This is a private community with standards. Those panels are an eyesore, and they're going to bring down everyone's property values. You need to remove them immediately, or I'll be forced to take action." "What kind of action?" I asked, genuinely curious where she thought she could go with this. "I know you work for that solar company," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Horizon something or other. I've seen their truck in your driveway. I'll call your boss and report you for harassing HOA members and violating community standards. I'm sure they won't appreciate having an employee who creates problems in his own neighborhood. You'll be lucky if you still have a job by the end of the week." I had to physically restrain myself from laughing. "You're going to call my boss? Don't test me," Patricia said. "I have connections. I know people in this valley. One phone call and you'll be unemployed. Is that really worth it for some stupid solar panels?" The thing was, I dealt with difficult HOA board members before through my business. Most of them backed down once they understood the law. But Patricia seemed like the type who'd escalate just to avoid admitting she was wrong. "Tell you what," I said. "Why don't you go ahead and make that call? I'll give you the company number." She blinked, clearly not expecting me to call her bluff. "Fine, write it down." I pulled out my wallet and handed her my business card. She snatched it from my hand, looked at it, and then her expression froze. I watched as her eyes moved from the Horizon Solar Solutions logo to my name printed below. Xavier Harrison, founder and CEO. The color drained from her face. "You're kidding." "Nope," I said. "Founded the company 8 years ago, so when you call to complain about me, you'll probably get my assistant, Sharon. She's great. Just tell her you're trying to report the CEO for legally installing solar panels on his own house. I'm sure she'll get a kick out of it." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For maybe 10 seconds, she just stood there, staring at the business card. Then she seemed to remember that she was supposed to be the authority figure here. "That doesn't change anything," she said. though her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. "You still violated HOA procedures. The architectural review process exists for a reason. And Arizona law exists to protect homeowners' rights to install solar energy devices," I countered. "Look, Patricia, I'm not trying to cause problems. I'm just installing panels on my own house. They're flush-mounted, top-quality equipment, and they'll actually increase my property value by about 15% based on comparable sales in the area. Nobody can even see them from the street because of the roof angle. I can see them from my backyard," she said. "Your house is 3 lots away." "It sets a precedent," Patricia insisted. "If I let you install solar panels without going through the proper channels, then everyone will think they can just do whatever they want. Next thing you know, someone will want to paint their house purple or put up a basketball hoop." I rubbed my temples. The temperature was pushing 105 degrees, and I'd been working since 7 that morning. The architectural review process for solar panels is legally unenforceable under state law. You can't require board approval for something the state explicitly protects. If you try to fine me, I'll take the HOA to court, and based on existing case law, I'll win. Then the HOA will be on the hook for my legal fees plus damages. Patricia's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night, 7 p.m. in the clubhouse." "You're required to attend." "Actually, I'm not required to attend anything," I said, "but sure, I'll be there. Should be interesting." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, still clutching my business card. I watched her go, then climbed back up my ladder. I had 3 more panels to install before the day got too hot to work safely. That evening, my phone rang while I was reviewing project bids for a commercial installation in Temp. It was my neighbor from across the street, Greg Martinez. Greg was a retired math teacher, probably 70 years old, and one of the few people in the neighborhood who'd actually been friendly when I moved in. "Xavier, I just got an email from Patricia," Greg said. "She's calling an emergency meeting about your solar panels. She's really got her claws out on this one." "Yeah, she showed up at my house this morning threatening to get me fired," I said. Greg chuckled. "I heard. News travels fast around here. Half the neighborhood knows she tried to report the CEO to himself. But here's the thing, you need to take this seriously. Patricia's been on the board for 12 years. She's gotten people foreclosed on for unpaid fines. She made the Johnsons rip out a playground set they'd installed for their kids. She forced the Chens to repaint their house twice because the beige wasn't the right shade. She doesn't lose these fights." "How does she get people foreclosed on for HOA fines?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "She racks up daily penalties until the amount gets high enough to file a lien. Then when people can't pay or refuse to pay, she forecloses on the lien. It's all technically legal under Arizona HOA law, even if it's completely insane. The rest of the board just goes along with whatever she wants." I felt my jaw tighten. I'd heard horror stories about aggressive HOAs, but I'd assumed they were exaggerated. "That's predatory." "That's Patricia," Greg said. "Look, I'm on your side here. I think solar panels are great, but I wanted to warn you that she's not going to let this go. She sees this as a challenge to her authority." "Thanks for the heads up," I said. "I'll be ready tomorrow night." After I hung up, I spent an hour researching Arizona HOA law and pulling up case files. I'd had my company's lawyers deal with HOA issues before, but I wanted to understand the specifics. What I found made me angry. Arizona had some of the most HOA-friendly laws in the country, giving boards extensive power to fine homeowners and even foreclose on properties. But there were also clear protections for solar installations, and courts had consistently ruled in favor of homeowners on that specific issue. The next evening, I showed up at the Meadowbrook Hills clubhouse at 6:45. The meeting wasn't supposed to start until 7, but I wanted to get a feel for the room. The clubhouse was a generic beige building with a pool out back and a meeting room that could hold maybe 50 people. When I walked in, Patricia was already there with 2 other board members, arranging papers on a table at the front of the room. She looked up when I entered, and I saw her whisper something to the man next to her. He was tall and thin with wire-rimmed glasses, maybe 60 years old. The other board member was a woman in her 40s with bright red hair and an expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. Residents started trickling in around 7. I was surprised by how many people showed up, probably 30 or so. Greg gave me a supportive nod as he took a seat. I recognized a few other neighbors by sight, though I hadn't really had a chance to get to know many people yet. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We have an important matter to address regarding a violation of our community standards." Xavier Harrison, who lives at 4287 Seguero Drive, has installed solar panels on his roof without obtaining architectural approval from the board. She projected a photo of my house onto a screen at the front of the room. Someone had clearly taken it from an angle that made the panels as visible as possible, though even then they were barely noticeable. As you can see, these industrial-looking panels are clearly visible and detract from the aesthetic unity of our neighborhood, Patricia continued. Our architectural standards exist to protect property values and maintain the beautiful appearance that makes Meadowbrook Hills such a desirable place to live. The thin man with glasses, who Patricia introduced as Vice President Robert Chen, spoke next. The HOA covenant requires all exterior modifications to receive board approval before installation. This process allows us to ensure that changes meet community standards and don't negatively impact neighbors. Mr. Harrison completely bypassed this process. I raised my hand. "Can I respond to that?" Patricia's expression suggested she'd rather eat glass. "You'll have a chance to speak in a moment. First, I want to present the board's proposed resolution." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a bulleted list of demands. Remove the solar panels within 30 days. Pay a fine of $5,000 for willful violation of HOA rules. Submit a formal written apology to be posted in the community newsletter, and agree to comply with all architectural review processes in the future. A murmur went through the crowd. Even for Patricia, this seemed extreme. "Now," Patricia said, "Mr. Harrison, you may address the board." I stood up, keeping my voice calm and professional. "Thanks. First, I want to clarify that I didn't bypass any legitimate process. Arizona Revised Statute 33-1816 explicitly states that HOAs cannot prohibit the installation of solar energy devices. While the HOA can establish reasonable architectural guidelines, they cannot ban solar installations or make the approval process so restrictive that it effectively serves as a ban. I installed these panels in full compliance with state law and county building codes. State law doesn't override private covenants, Robert said. Actually, in this case it does, I replied. Arizona law specifically addresses this issue. The legislature recognized that some HOAs were using architectural review processes to effectively ban solar installations, so they passed a law protecting homeowners' rights. There have been multiple court cases upholding this. I can provide citations if you'd like. Patricia's face was getting red again. This isn't about the law. This is about respect for the community and following proper procedures. With respect, it's entirely about the law, I said. You can't enforce rules that violate state statutes. If you attempt to fine me or place a lien on my property, I'll file suit against the HOA. Based on precedent, the court will rule in my favor, and the HOA will be liable for my legal fees. That money comes out of everyone's HOA dues. That got people's attention. I saw several residents exchange glances. A woman in her 30s raised her hand. I have a question. If Xavier is right about the law, why are we even having this meeting? Aren't we just wasting everyone's time? Because rules matter, Patricia snapped. If we let people ignore the architectural review process, the whole system falls apart. But if the architectural review process can't legally apply to solar panels, then he didn't ignore anything that matters, the woman persisted. He should have submitted the request anyway, out of courtesy, Patricia said. I jumped back in. I actually did email the board 4 months ago informing you of my plans to install solar panels. I didn't receive a response. Patricia's eyes widened slightly. Robert leaned over to whisper to her. We have no record of that email, Patricia said. I pulled out my phone. I have the sent message right here with a read receipt showing that it was opened by Patricia Vandermeer at meadowbrookhillsshowa.com on January 15th at 9:23 a.m. I also sent a follow-up 2 weeks later that was also read but not answered. The red-haired board member who'd been silent until now suddenly spoke up. Patricia, why wasn't this brought to the board? I must have missed it, Patricia said quickly. I get dozens of emails a day. But you read it, I pointed out. Twice. Greg raised his hand. I have a question for the board. How much will it cost the HOA if we pursue this and lose in court? Robert adjusted his glasses. Legal fees for this type of case could run anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000, depending on how far it goes. If we lose, we'd be responsible for Mr. Harrison's legal fees as well. So we could be looking at 6 figures in legal costs to fight something we're probably going to lose anyway, Greg asked. It's not about the money, Patricia said. It's about the principle. It's always about the money when it's coming out of our HOA dues, a man in the back called out. The meeting was getting away from Patricia, and I could see her struggling to regain control. Let's move to a vote. All in favor of enforcing the resolution as presented, Patricia raised her hand. After a long pause, Robert reluctantly raised his. The red-haired woman kept her hands in her lap. That's 2-1, Patricia said. The resolution passes. Wait, the red-haired woman said. Don't we need a majority of the full board? There are 5 board positions. 2 positions are currently vacant, Patricia said. 2 out of 3 present members constitutes a majority. I made a mental note to look into how those positions had become vacant and why they hadn't been filled. Just so we're clear, I said, you're officially notifying me that I need to remove my solar panels and pay a $5,000 fine. That's correct, Patricia said. You have 30 days to comply. And if I refuse, then we'll add daily penalties of $500 and pursue a lien against your property. I nodded slowly. Okay, I'm going to give you one more chance to reconsider this. If you withdraw the resolution right now, we can all walk away from this. But if you proceed, I will fight this and it will get expensive for the HOA. The board has made its decision, Patricia said. All right then, I said. You'll be hearing from my attorney. The meeting dissolved into chaos as people started arguing with each other and calling out questions to the board. I slipped out and headed home, already mentally composing the email I needed to send to my lawyer. By the time I got home, I had 3 text messages from neighbors. One was from Greg, saying he was sorry the board had been so unreasonable. The other 2 were from people I'd barely spoken to, asking if I needed help fighting the HOA. Apparently, Patricia had made enough enemies over the years that people were ready to rally against her. The next morning, I called my attorney, Michelle Bradshaw. She'd handled various legal issues for my company over the years, and I knew she had experience with HOA disputes. "Let me get this straight," she said after I explained the situation. "You're the one being sued, not your company." "Correct. This is personal about my house. And you notified them in advance, they ignored you, and now they're trying to fine you for something that's explicitly protected under state law. That's the situation." Michelle laughed. "Xavier, this is the easiest case I've seen in months. I'll draft a cease and desist letter today. If they don't back down, we'll file for injunctive relief and counter-sue for harassment and legal fees. I'd be shocked if this goes to trial." "The HOA president seems pretty committed to pushing this," I said. "Then the HOA is going to learn an expensive lesson. Give me the details on the board members and I'll get started." Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated quickly. Michelle sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA, explaining in detail why their resolution violated Arizona law and warning them of the legal consequences if they proceeded. Patricia responded by having the HOA's lawyer send a letter back, doubling down on their position. Then the fine started. I received a certified letter informing me that I was being fined $500 per day starting immediately, and that I now owed an initial penalty of $5,000 plus $7,000 in daily fines. The letter gave me 10 days to pay, or the HOA would begin lien proceedings. Michelle filed an emergency motion for injunctive relief with the Maricopa County Superior Court, asking the judge to immediately halt the fines and prevent the HOA from taking any further action while the case was litigated. She also filed a countersuit against the HOA for harassment, abuse of authority, and violation of Arizona's solar rights statute, seeking damages and legal fees. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, which meant the HOA continued racking up fines in the meantime. By the time we walked into court, they claimed I owed over $40,000. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix was packed as usual. Michelle and I arrived early and found seats on a bench outside the courtroom. The HOA's lawyer, a guy named David Price from a firm that specialized in HOA representation, showed up with Patricia and Robert. Patricia looked me straight in the eye as she walked past, her expression radiating smug confidence. She thought she was going to win this. When we were called into the courtroom, Judge Sandra Wu presided. She was in her 50s, with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. I'd done some research and learned that she'd ruled against HOAs in several previous cases. David Price went first, arguing that the HOA had legitimate authority to enforce architectural standards, and that I had willfully violated those standards. He claimed that allowing my solar panels would set a precedent that would lead to chaos in the community. Judge Wu interrupted him. "Counselor, are you familiar with Arizona Revised Statute 33-18-16? "Yes, Your Honor, but in this case, does that statute prohibit HOAs from banning solar installations?" "It provides certain protections, yes, but it's a yes or no question, Counselor." Price shifted his weight. "Yes, Your Honor." "And did the HOA effectively ban Mr. Harrison's solar installation by requiring its removal?" "The HOA simply required proper procedures to be followed by requiring removal of an already installed, legally permitted solar system. That sounds like a ban to me." Michelle stood when it was our turn. She methodically walked through the timeline, showing that I'd notified the HOA in advance, received no response, proceeded with a legal installation following all county permits, and then been threatened with tens of thousands of dollars in fines for exercising my state-protected rights. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of HOA overreach that the legislature sought to prevent when they passed the Solar Rights Statute, Michelle said. The HOA is using its architectural review process as a weapon to ban something they have no legal authority to ban. Meanwhile, they're threatening my client with financial ruin through escalating daily fines. We're asking the court to immediately halt these fines, order the HOA to drop all penalties, and award damages for the harassment and stress this has caused. Judge Wu didn't even take a recess to consider. I'm granting the injunction. All fines are hereby voided. The HOA is prohibited from taking any further action against Mr. Harrison regarding his solar installation. Furthermore, I'm ruling that the HOA violated Arizona law and Mr. Harrison's statutory rights. The HOA will pay Mr. Harrison's legal fees, which will be calculated and submitted to the court within 30 days. Patricia's face went white. Price started to object, but Judge Wu held up her hand. Counselor, you advised your client to pursue a case that had no legal merit. Your client ignored clear statutory protections and attempted to fine a homeowner tens of thousands of dollars for exercising his legal rights. Be grateful I'm not sanctioning you personally. This case is closed. We walked out of the courtroom 20 minutes later with a complete victory. Michelle was grinning. That went even better than I expected. The judge was not happy with them. What happens now? I asked. I'll calculate our legal fees and submit them to the court. The HOA will have to pay, and there's nothing they can do about it. You're free to keep your solar panels, and they can't bother you about it ever again. On the drive back to Gilbert, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd been confident we'd win, but there's always uncertainty in legal matters. Now it was over. When I got home, Greg was waiting on my front porch. How'd it go? Complete victory, I said. All fines voided. HOA has to pay my legal fees. They can't touch the solar panels. Greg let out a whoop and clapped me on the shoulder. That's fantastic. The whole neighborhood's been talking about this. A lot of people are really happy someone finally stood up to Patricia. Speaking of which, I said, Greg, you mentioned that 2 board positions are vacant. How did that happen? Greg's expression darkened. Patricia pushed them out. One member disagreed with her about fining someone for having the wrong mailbox color. Patricia made his life so miserable that he resigned. The other one quit after Patricia refused to let the board review the HOA's finances. That was about a year ago. Are those positions supposed to be filled by election? Yes, but Patricia keeps postponing the elections. She says there aren't enough qualified candidates. I nodded slowly, an idea forming. What if there were qualified candidates? The next day, I started making phone calls. The first was to a friend who ran a title company. I need you to pull something for me. Records of all HOA foreclosures in Meadowbrook Hills for the last 10 years. That's public record, she said. Give me a few hours. The report she sent over was damning. In the past decade, the Meadowbrook Hills HOA had foreclosed on 12 properties for unpaid HOA fines. 12 families had lost their homes, not because they couldn't pay their mortgages, but because Patricia had buried them in penalties for minor covenant violations. One family had been foreclosed on for owing $18,000 in fines that had started with a $100 penalty for leaving their trash cans visible from the street. I then called the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA regulations. I filed a formal complaint against the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board, alleging abuse of authority, failure to hold required elections, and improper financial management. I attached Judge Wu's ruling and the foreclosure records. While that complaint worked its way through the system, I started talking to neighbors. It turned out a lot of people were fed up with Patricia's reign. The problem was that most people felt powerless to do anything about it. "We need to organize," I told a group of about 15 neighbors who'd gathered at my house one evening. "The HOA covenant requires elections for vacant board positions. Patricia has been illegally postponing those elections. We need to force her to hold them, and we need to run candidates who will actually represent the community's interests." A woman named Diana Lopez spoke up. She was a lawyer who worked for the county attorney's office. "I'll run. I've wanted to get Patricia off that board for years." "I'll run too," said Martin Foster, a retired engineer who'd lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. Over the next week, we collected signatures from residents demanding that the board hold elections immediately. Arizona law required elections within 60 days once a certain percentage of homeowners requested them. We got 3 times the required signatures. Patricia tried to ignore us at first, then sent out an email claiming the petition was invalid due to technical irregularities. Diana, being a lawyer, had made sure the petition was perfect. She sent a response to all residents explaining that Patricia's objections had no legal basis and that the board was required to hold elections. The Arizona Department of Real Estate Investigation added pressure. An investigator showed up and started auditing the HOA's books and procedures. It turned out that Patricia had been running the HOA without proper financial oversight for years. The audit revealed several irregularities, including HOA funds being spent on personal expenses. In early June, about 6 weeks after the court ruling, Patricia finally scheduled elections. The meeting was packed. Every seat in the clubhouse was filled and people lined the walls. I'd never seen community engagement like this. Patricia tried to control the meeting, but she'd lost her authority. When she attempted to limit candidate speeches to 2 minutes each, residents shouted her down. Diana gave a 10-minute speech outlining her vision for an HOA that served residents instead of harassing them. Martin talked about bringing transparency and accountability to the board. A third candidate, Jennifer Walsh, was a financial analyst who promised to clean up the HOA's books. The vote wasn't even close. Diana, Martin, and Jennifer won the 3 open positions with overwhelming support. Combined with the red-haired board member, who turned out to be named Sarah Montgomery and who'd been quietly opposing Patricia for months, the new board had a majority. The first new board meeting was held a week later. I attended, along with probably 50 other residents. The energy in the room was completely different from that hostile meeting back in March. Diana, as the senior new board member, called for a vote to remove Patricia as HOA president. The motion passed 4-1, with only Patricia voting against it. Robert Chen, who'd been Patricia's yes man for years, abstained. "Furthermore," Diana said, "based on the findings of the state investigation, the board is voting to remove Patricia Vandermeer from the board entirely, effective immediately, due to misuse of HOA funds and abuse of authority." Patricia stood up, her face purple with rage. "You can't do this. I've given 12 years to this community." "You've given 12 years of harassment and illegal foreclosures," Martin said. "The state's investigation found that you spent HOA funds on personal expenses, including charging dinners and travel to the HOA credit card. You're lucky we're not pressing criminal charges." "I want to see the evidence," Patricia demanded. Diana slid a folder across the table. "Here's a copy of the audit report. You charged $14,000 in personal expenses to the HOA over the past 3 years. That's embezzlement." The room went silent. Patricia grabbed the folder, flipped through a few pages, and then threw it back on the table. This is ridiculous. Those were legitimate business expenses. Your hair salon appointments were business expenses, Jennifer asked. Your weekend trip to Sedona. Your membership at that spa in Scottsdale. Patricia looked around the room, seeming to realize for the first time that she'd lost. Fine. You want me gone. I'm gone. But this community is going to fall apart without my leadership. Give it 6 months and you'll all be begging me to come back. She stormed out, and I never saw her again at an HOA meeting. The new board got to work immediately. They passed a resolution formally recognizing homeowners' rights to install solar panels without board approval, in compliance with state law. They overhauled the architectural review process to make it less onerous. They established financial oversight procedures and published the HOA's budget online for all residents to see. Most importantly, they reached out to the families who'd been foreclosed on under Patricia's regime. While they couldn't undo those foreclosures, the board issued formal apologies and set up a victims fund, using recovered money from Patricia's repayment of the embezzled funds. The Arizona Department of Real Estate investigation concluded in August. Patricia was ordered to repay the $14,000 she'd improperly charged to the HOA, plus penalties. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 10 years. Robert Chen received a formal reprimand for failing in his oversight duties, but was allowed to remain on the board after he committed to supporting the reforms. In September, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office announced they were filing criminal charges against Patricia for embezzlement. The amount might have seemed small for a criminal case, but the prosecutor explained to me that they wanted to send a message that HOA board members couldn't abuse their positions with impunity. I attended Patricia's arraignment, not out of spite, but because I wanted to see the process through. She pleaded not guilty initially, but her lawyer worked out a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to misdemeanor embezzlement, paid full restitution plus court fees, and received 2 years of probation. As part of the plea agreement, she was permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position in Arizona. By October, life in Meadowbrook Hills had transformed. The new board had created committees to handle different aspects of community management, bringing in resident volunteers and distributing power rather than concentrating it. They'd revised the fine structure to make penalties reasonable and proportionate. They'd established a dispute resolution process that gave homeowners a fair hearing before any fines were imposed, and solar panels started appearing on roofs throughout the neighborhood. Turned out a lot of people had been interested in solar, but were afraid of Patricia's wrath. My company ended up installing systems on 15 houses in Meadowbrook Hills over the next 6 months. I offered my neighbors a discount, though I made sure to disclose that I owned the company and let them get quotes from competitors too. Most chose Horizon Solar Solutions anyway. Greg got solar panels installed in November. I helped with the installation personally, and afterward we sat on his patio drinking lemonade and looking up at his new system. You know, Greg said, when you moved in, I thought you were going to be just another young guy who kept to himself. Didn't expect you to take down the HOA tyrant and revolutionize the whole neighborhood, I laughed. I didn't expect it either. I just wanted to install solar panels. Well, you did that and a lot more. This place is actually pleasant to live in now. People aren't afraid to do normal things with their homes. Last week, the Johnsons put up that playground set they'd been wanting for their kids. Nobody hassled them about it. That's how it should be, I said. HOAs are supposed to maintain common areas and handle basic community needs, not micromanage everyone's lives. Tell that to Patricia, Greg said, then paused. Actually, don't. I like that she's gone. In December, the new board held a community holiday party at the clubhouse. Under Patricia's leadership, the HOA had only held mandatory meetings where she lectured residents about rule violations. This was the first social event in years. Diana approached me at the party with a glass of wine in hand. Xavier, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. If you hadn't stood up to Patricia, we'd probably still be living under her thumb. I just didn't want to take down my solar panels, I said. You did more than that. You showed everyone that Patricia wasn't invincible. That gave people the courage to organize and demand change. A lot of people in this neighborhood are grateful. Sarah Montgomery joined us. She'd been re-elected to the board in a proper election and had become one of its most effective members. I should have stood up to Patricia years ago, she said. I'm ashamed that I waited so long. You stood up when it mattered, I told her. That last vote before the court hearing, you were the only one who opposed Patricia's resolution. Fat lot of good it did, Sarah said. But you're right, at least I can say I tried. Martin Foster appeared, looking pleased with himself. Good news. The community vote on the proposed budget passed unanimously. We're fully funded for landscaping improvements, pool renovations, and we still managed to reduce monthly HOA dues by 20%. How'd you manage that? Deanna asked. Turns out when you're not spending money on legal fees for baseless lawsuits and investigations, the budget has a lot more flexibility, Martin said with a grin. As I looked around the clubhouse at my neighbors laughing and celebrating together, I felt genuinely good about where we'd ended up. The whole situation had been stressful and time-consuming, but it had resulted in real positive change for the community. My company was thriving too. The publicity from the HOA case had been surprisingly good for business. Several news outlets had covered the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath tale of a homeowner standing up to HOA overreach. My phone had been ringing constantly with new clients who'd heard about the case and wanted to support a company that fought for homeowners' rights. In January, I was invited to speak at an Arizona state legislature committee hearing about proposed reforms to HOA law. Several other homeowners who'd had issues with aggressive HOAs testified as well. The committee was considering a bill that would strengthen protections for homeowners and increase oversight of HOA boards. I talked about my experience with Patricia and the Meadowbrook Hills HOA, and I presented the foreclosure data I'd compiled. 12 families lost their homes over minor rule violations, I told the committee. That's unconscionable. HOAs serve a legitimate purpose, but they need better oversight and accountability mechanisms. The bill passed out of committee and eventually became law, establishing stronger protections for homeowners and creating a state-level HOA ombudsman to handle complaints. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was progress. By March, almost a full year after Patricia had first appeared at the bottom of my ladder, life had settled into a comfortable routine. My solar panels were producing great power, reducing my electricity bill to almost nothing during the summer months. The company was growing steadily, and I'd hired 3 new installers to keep up with demand. One Saturday afternoon, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up in my driveway. A woman in her 30s got out, looking uncertain. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Are you Xavier Harrison?" she asked. "That's me. My name is Amanda Peterson. I used to live in Meadowbrook Hills at 4521 Palo Verde Court. Your HOA foreclosed on my house 4 years ago." I set down the wrench I'd been holding. "I'm sorry that happened to you. I wasn't living here then, but I've heard about what Patricia Vandermeer did to a lot of families." "I know. I've been following the news about what happened here, I just wanted to thank you for standing up to her. My husband and I lost our house over a fence violation. We'd installed a fence around our backyard without getting HOA approval. Patricia fined us $100, then added daily penalties when we couldn't pay immediately. Within 6 months, we owed $18,000. By the time we tried to fight it, she'd already filed foreclosure proceedings. That's terrible, I said. Where are you living now? We bought a house in Mesa, outside of any HOA, Amanda said with a slight smile. We'll never live in an HOA community again. But I wanted you to know that you helped us get some closure. When the new board reached out and apologized, and when Patricia got convicted, it felt like someone finally acknowledged that what happened to us was wrong. We talked for about 20 minutes. Amanda told me about the stress and shame of losing their house, the impact it had on their credit, and how long it had taken to recover financially. Before she left, I gave her my business card. If you ever want to install solar panels on your new place, I said, call me. I'll do the installation at cost, no markup. Amanda's eyes got a little teary. That's very kind, thank you. After she drove away, I went back into the house and found myself thinking about how one person's abuse of power had rippled out to affect so many lives. Patricia probably never thought of herself as a villain. In her mind, she was enforcing standards and maintaining property values. But her rigid adherence to rules, combined with her need for control, had caused real harm to real people. The contrast with how things worked now under the new board was stark. When the Hendersons 2 streets over wanted to install a pergola in their backyard, they submitted a simple notification to the board. Sarah reviewed it to make sure it met basic safety standards and didn't violate any actual legal restrictions, then approved it within 48 hours. No drama, no power trips, no threats. That's how it should work. In April, I got a call from Michelle Bradshaw, my attorney. Xavier, I have interesting news. Patricia Vandermeer's house is on the market. She's moving, looks like it. I guess she couldn't stand living in the neighborhood after everything that happened. I looked up the listing out of curiosity. She was selling for about $30,000 less than comparable houses in the area. The listing photos showed a house that was immaculately maintained but completely sterile, without any personal touches or warmth. Good riddance, I said. The house sold within 2 weeks. I never learned where Patricia moved, and I didn't care to find out. In May, the Meadowbrook Hills HOA held its annual meeting, the first one under the new board's leadership. Instead of the tense, confrontational affairs that meetings had been under Patricia's rule, this one was actually pleasant. The board presented the financial report, which showed the HOA in solid fiscal condition. They discussed upcoming projects, including renovating the playground and adding new exercise equipment to the fitness center. When they opened the floor for resident concerns, people raised reasonable questions about things like landscaping schedules and pool hours. The board listened, took notes, and promised to address the issues. There was no yelling, no threats, no power struggles. Diana gave a closing speech. A year ago, this community was a very different place. We've come a long way, but we still have work to do. The board's job is to serve all of you, not to rule over you. We're here to maintain our common areas, handle basic administrative tasks, and otherwise stay out of your way so you can enjoy your homes. That's what an HOA should do. The room erupted in applause. After the meeting, several people approached me to chat. The Johnsons thanked me again for helping create an environment where they felt comfortable putting up play equipment for their kids. The Chens, who'd been forced to repaint their house twice under Patricia's rule, told me they were finally enjoying living in the neighborhood again. A younger couple I didn't recognize introduced themselves as prospective buyers. "We're looking at houses in Meadowbrook Hills," the husband said. "We heard about what happened with your HOA, and honestly, that's one of the reasons we're interested. It shows that this community stands up for what's right." "That's a first," I said. "Usually, HOA drama would scare people away." "Not when the drama resulted in throwing out a tyrant and establishing reasonable leadership," the wife said. "That's actually a selling point." They bought a house 3 streets over in June and became good neighbors. By summer, my solar panel installation was showing a full year of performance data. I'd offset 98% of my electricity usage, saving about $2,400 on power bills. The system would pay for itself in about 6 years, after which it would be pure savings for the remaining 20-plus years of the panel's operational life. More importantly, I was generating about 11 megawatt-hours of clean energy per year, avoiding roughly 7 tons of carbon dioxide emissions annually. Multiply that by the 16 houses in the neighborhood that now had solar installations, and we were making a real environmental impact. The company's commercial division was expanding too. We'd landed a contract to install solar on a warehouse complex in Chandler, one of our biggest projects yet. The publicity from the HOA case had helped establish Horizon Solar Solutions as a company that stood behind its customers and wasn't afraid to fight for what was right. In August, I was interviewed for a podcast about HOA reform. The host asked me what advice I'd give to other homeowners dealing with overreaching HOAs. "Document everything," I said. "Keep records of all communications, all payments, all notices. Know your state laws and your HOA's actual covenants." A lot of HOA board members rely on homeowners not knowing their rights. If you do know your rights, you're in a much stronger position. And don't be afraid to push back when the HOA is clearly in the wrong. They're counting on you being too intimidated or too busy to fight. "But fighting an HOA can be expensive," the host said. "It can be," I agreed. "But so is paying illegal fines or worse, losing your house to foreclosure. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself. And if you can organize with other homeowners who are also fed up with the HOA's behavior, you're much stronger together." The podcast episode got a lot of downloads and comments. I heard from homeowners across the country dealing with similar issues. While I couldn't help everyone, I tried to point people toward resources and lawyer referrals when I could. In September, Greg had a small heart attack. Nothing too serious, fortunately, but it was a wake-up call for him. I visited him in the hospital, bringing magazines and bad coffee. "You know what I was thinking about when I was lying there in the ambulance," Greg said. "I was thinking about how glad I was that Patricia wasn't in charge anymore. Under the old regime, I'd have been stressed about whether the ambulance being parked in front of my house for too long would result in some kind of fine or complaint. Now I can just focus on getting better." That's bleak, Greg. But true. That woman made people afraid to live in their own homes. "You freed us from that." "The community freed itself," I said. "I just gave people a push." Greg recovered well and was back home within a week. The new HOA board sent him flowers and a card, something Patricia never would have done. October brought the annual HOA election. Deanna, Martin, Sarah, and Jennifer all ran for re-election unopposed. Robert Chen chose not to run again, having decided he preferred retirement without board responsibilities. A new candidate, Thomas Wu, ran for the open seat. He was an architect who promised to bring professional expertise to architectural reviews while respecting homeowners' rights. Thomas won easily, and the board continued its work. In November, I was invited to speak at a conference for solar industry professionals. I give a presentation about navigating HOA objections to solar installations, using my own experience as a case study. The room was packed, and the queue and a session ran long because so many installers had stories about difficult HOAs. The key thing to remember, I told the audience, is that most states have some form of solar rights laws. Know your state's specific statutes. Educate your customers about their rights before installation, and don't be afraid to push back against HOA overreach. We're not just installing solar panels. We're helping homeowners exercise their legal rights and contribute to a cleaner energy future. The speech was well received, and several other solar companies reached out afterward to ask about how we handled HOA issues. December marked the end of an eventful year. I hosted a holiday party at my house, inviting the neighbors and board members who'd been part of the transformation of Meadowbrook Hills. My solar panels sparkled in the winter sun, and nobody mentioned them as eyesores anymore. Diana raised a glass. To Xavier, who taught us that sometimes standing up to a bully is exactly what a community needs. To Xavier, everyone echoed. Actually, I said, let's make this toast to all of us, to a community that decided it deserved better and did something about it. To the homeowners who signed petitions and showed up to meetings, to the board members who took on the responsibility of leadership, and to every person who refused to be intimidated by someone who abused their authority. That's what made the difference. We clinked glasses and spent the evening celebrating how far we'd come. Looking back on everything that happened, I sometimes wondered what would have occurred if I'd simply given in when Patricia first showed up at my ladder. If I'd taken down the panels to avoid conflict, or if I'd gone through some pointless architectural review process that she would have used to deny or delay the installation indefinitely. But I'd built my business on the principle that solar energy was too important to be blocked by arbitrary obstacles. I'd fought through regulatory hurdles and financing challenges and technical problems for 8 years because I believed that residential solar was crucial for our energy future. I wasn't about to let an overzealous HOA president stop me from installing panels on my own house. The irony was that Patricia's threat to call my boss had been the moment when she lost whatever leverage she thought she had. She'd been so confident that threatening my job would make me cave. Instead, she'd revealed that she didn't know who she was dealing with and had massively miscalculated the situation. That moment, standing in my driveway handing her my business card and watching her face as she realized I owned the company, was probably the beginning of the end for her reign over the HOA. She'd built her power on intimidation, and suddenly she'd encountered someone she couldn't intimidate. That crack in her armor had given others the courage to start pushing back too. In January, more than a year after the initial confrontation, I was doing routine maintenance on my solar panels when a car pulled up. For a moment, I had a flashback to Patricia appearing at my ladder. But this was a different woman, younger with a friendly smile. "Hi," she called up. "Sorry to bother you. I'm looking at the house 2 doors down. The realtor mentioned you have solar panels and that there had been some kind of issue with the HOA. I climbed down and shook her hand. "Yeah, there was an issue, but it got resolved. The HOA tried to make me remove the panels. I took them to court, won, and then the community voted in a new board. It's all good now." "Oh, perfect," she said, looking relieved. "We really want to go solar, but we've heard horror stories about HOAs blocking installations. It's good to know this community is solar-friendly." "Very solar-friendly," I assured her. "In fact, if you do buy here and want to install solar, here's my card. I own a solar installation company." She looked at the card and laughed. Wait, you're Xavier Harrison. I read about you. You're the guy who fought the crazy HOA president. That's me. That's amazing. Okay, you just sold me on this neighborhood. If we get this house, I'm definitely calling you about solar. They bought the house, and I installed their solar system in March. 16 houses with solar became 17. By spring, life had fully normalized. The drama of the previous year felt like a distant memory. The HOA functioned smoothly under the new board's leadership, handling routine business without controversy. Neighbors were friendly and relaxed. The community felt like an actual community instead of a police state. I continued running Horizon Solar Solutions, and business kept growing. We opened a second office in Tucson and hired more staff. The company was on track to install over 500 residential systems that year, plus several major commercial projects. And my house, with its solar panels gleaming on the roof, stood as a quiet testament to the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it would be easier to back down. Those panels generated clean energy every day, saved me money every month, and served as a reminder that individual actions can lead to meaningful change. Patricia Vandermeer had thought she could bully me into submission by threatening my job. Instead, she'd kicked off a chain of events that ended her reign, reformed the HOA, improved the entire community, and even contributed to better state laws protecting homeowners. All because she didn't realize that sometimes, when you threaten to report someone to their boss, you might discover that they are the boss. And that boss might just have the resources, knowledge, and determination to fight back and win. The solar panels stayed on my roof, where they belonged, generating power and proving that standing your ground sometimes makes all the difference.